heartfelt law, society, scholarship, and fandom. Welcome to Semantic Shenanigans.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Semantic Shenanigans, show number 15. As always, I am Janet Gershon-Siegel, and with me from an undisclosed location from somewhere within the heart of this great nation is my co-host, Shanna Gilkison. Yay!
Yay! What's up?
Not much. I'm recording a podcast. How about you?
Oh, what a coincidence. So am I.
Oh my God! Serendipity, how exciting.
It is, and it's raining, so the snow's gone for the moment, and I could see where the corn would normally go.
See, there you go. We just have dirty dirty patches of snow on kind of, bare ground, so it's very slaty outside, but we're actually, it's kind of warm here today. Very weird. So this means I'm probably going to get some horrible cold from it.
Oh, that
awesome. Sucks. Always the optimist here. So yes, I'm the voice of doom. So what's been shaking in your life?
Well, earlier this month, I did the oral defense of my preliminary exams. So just to kind of refresh everybody's memory, kind of like the essay test from hell, I had a week to write 4 very long essays on various aspects of my discipline and my possible dissertation. So I had passed the writtens after last, and I finally had the oral defense, which was interesting and fun because between weather, illness, and a committee member being on sabbatical, I had to Skype in 3 out of 4 committee members. So that was interesting, but we made it.
Okay.
And right now, I'm just working on the proposal phase to get ready for my dissertation. And I'm also chunking away at a paper I'm going to be presenting at the Popular Culture Association's national conference on the X-Files.
Oh, terrific. Anything, what specifically on the X-Files?
I'm still writing it.
Oh, okay. Well, then, as you know.
But it's kind of conceptually, like, I'm kind of playing with this idea of the X-Files, the tagline, "The truth is out there," in this age of post-truth and alternative facts, and kind of like how the show is navigating our day and age.
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah, it and that's just such a wonderful tagline, because it's not only that the truth is out there, that it's, perhaps alien or it's off of this world, but also, the colloquial meaning of the phrase "out there," that it's wild, that it's crazy, that it's something that you will find hard to believe.
Yeah, and I think that multi-layeredness of the X-Files, both, in that particular tagline and just the various types of subject matter that the show deals with, is part of it bring quality, and people love it enough that all these years later, there is a season 11, and what a coincidence, we're going to talk about season 11 a little bit.
Woohoo! All right. So yeah, we're there's.
What do you got going on, Janet?
Everything I have going on is writing, it seems. I have written a short story every day in January so far. Woohoo! Everything from like little things that were like 250 words long or whatever, and one of them was, I think, about 4,400. But for the most part, they've been under 2,000 words. They've been pretty short, and just sort of little scenes of this and that, mostly science fiction, actually a lot of first contact stories, because those I seem to be able to reel off really quickly. And what I'm probably going to try to do with the better ones is see if I can get some of them into anthologies and continue to expand my portfolio. The other thing is I'm going to be looking to put together a beta reading team next month. for people who might be interested in reading short stuff or long stuff, in order to try to give me some perspective on whether any of this stuff is working or not. Because yeah, it's lovely to get accolades online in the open, but when it's behind, metaphorical closed doors, if you tell me that this scene isn't working, or I can't tell the difference between these two characters, or why is this chapter here, that's extremely good feedback for me, and that's what I need to know. Because if I send this stuff out to to publishers, and that those sort of structural massive problems are not addressed, then I get shot down, and I don't know why. And it's much better if somebody tells me, beta reading is vital anyway. But what I'm attempting to do, what I really want to do this year, is give it more structure and a little more accountability, because I do have people who I rely on for beta reading, but they tend to sort of come and go, and sometimes it is months before I hear back on maybe 3,000 words worth of stuff. And, recognize that every page is approximately 500 words. So if it's 3,000 words that I'm talking about, what is that? 6 pages? It's really not a lot of reading, and this shouldn't be taking somebody 90 days to read. This should be taking somebody 60 minutes to read, and then reel off, whatever their objections are. So, it should be 90 minutes and not 90 days. And while, I absolutely recognize that I'm, not really paying these people, except, I'm happy to send them, autographed copies or whatever. And of course they're getting the first look at stuff, which is kind of exciting. So I recognize that I can't really push people, and that's also why sometimes these things take forever, because I'm not pushing. But at the same time, people, if you say you're going to beta read, please beta read. Please do what you said you were going to do. I'm off my soapbox now.
That's okay. And it would just occur to me too that that's kind of like one of the biggest differences between fan writing and professional writing, and why, number one, a lot of fan writers don't make the transition from one world to the other, because it's two totally different kinds of audiences. And we've talked about this on the show before. You did fanfic before and that kind of stuff. Your readership there just kind of wants more of the same for you. They don't want you to do different stuff. But then also, like, trying to get these people who helped you as beta readers, it's like, yeah, they're volunteers and deal with all of the usual stuff when you're at other people's mercy. I mean, one film that I worked on a few years ago, we had no budget, so almost all of our labor was voluntary, right down to the acting talent. So you are really at people's mercy when you're not paying them. If it takes them 3 months, it takes them 3 months, and there's really not a lot you can do about that. And then also, because they're doing it for free, their motivations are different. Like, they don't have a paycheck, right? And, maybe they're only doing it because they want the first crack at whatever it is that you have to do, not because they have particular passion for editorial work.
Yeah, I think that there's folks who are out there who really just want to see the first cut of stuff, because that's kind of exciting, to see the creative process, particularly if you're not used to it. I have people from high school who might volunteer for this. I don't really know yet, and if they do, then I have to kind of rein them in, because I don't want this to be the cheering section. At the same time, it's my baby. I'm sensitive. I've got feelings, and they get hurt, and I don't want anybody tearing me a new one. But and I want criticism to be constructive. Like I said, if you can't tell the difference between two characters, I want to hear it. But I don't want to hear this sucks. I hate it. You should stop writing and go jump off the shortest pier. That you find. It's of course I don't want to hear that. So I know that there are people also who they want very much to be nice, or they think that that's going to sustain the relationship better if they're gentle and nice about things. And being nice and, being sensitive about it, I think is kind of one thing. If you're just, you're trying to soften the blow and saying, okay, well, yeah, I couldn't tell the difference between these two characters, but I think they've got potential, and here's how I think they could be changed, and you can, of course, take this criticism or not, and, and do what I'm suggesting or not. That's one thing versus, telling me everything is groovy and it's not.
Yeah, you don't. It's unhelpful to surround yourself with those people who are gonna tell you whatever it is they think that you want to hear. That's not a beta reader. That's a cheer. But again, the teardown doesn't work either, and I kind of have problems in those beta readers. Whether I'm the beta reader or I'm getting beta read, because I have such a different process and approach to that. Because I worked in my alma mater's writing center for several years. I took a class on how to be a peer tutor, and then I went on as a master's student. One of my assistantship assignments was to be a consultant in the center. And so there, we're trained to leave authors in control of their own paper. So, I make suggestions, I do noticings, I ask questions. I do point out things like you spelled this wrong, or, that kind of thing, or I'm not really sure what you mean. But what I really hate is getting back a piece of my writing with all kinds of track changes markup where people have actually gone in and changed things for me. I dislike that, and I will not do that to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I have a professional editor for stuff like that. If I'm misspelling the word exaggerated, and believe me, that's one word that I constantly misspell, because I swear it changes from double G to double R overnight when I'm not looking. But that's her job, and I pay her. She's a professional, and I'm happy to pay her for that. But that's what I don't want. I don't want the I know grammar rules. I know when something's passive voice, and maybe it's passive voice for a reason. I mean, they're passive voice isn't incorrect. It's just when you use it, you can use it properly. So I don't want to see that. Although, if somebody says to me, this character was left-handed in chapter 5 and now in chapter 17 he's right-handed, yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, we see this in academia a lot too, and I've even gotten these papers. People will go after the small editorial stuff like spelling, grammar, and that kind of thing, but what they haven't really given attention to is the rest of the paper, or is the rest of the story doing what it's supposed to? And if it's not doing what it's supposed to, then telling me I spelled chartreuse wrong is kind of the least of my problems right now, and we shouldn't be talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've also found is that there's a definite qualitative difference between people who, for the longer pieces, for people who read little dribs and drabs over a long period of time versus somebody who just reads the whole thing at once. Because I had done that with Real Hub of the Universe. And for people who were reading it in dribs and drabs, I changed things accordingly as I was, as people suggested, or I rejected their suggestions. And then this woman read the whole thing through, and she said, you need to cut down on the number of times you say all right, because everybody says it. And part of the reason is because this takes place in a Victorian era, and not a lot of people would say okay, particularly people from outside the United States. But I did a find on that, and I found I had done that, I don't know, God knows, lots and lots of times. So that was extremely helpful feedback. And it was something that she noticed because she read all some odd thousand words in one shot versus somebody reading, 3,000 words over the course of 90 days.
Yeah, it is a difference. And I know for myself, when I try to approach things, I do try to do a one-sitting thing, unless it's physically impossible. If we're talking, a multi-chaptered book, just with my schedule, it's not necessarily possible. But I do try to read as much of it as I can in one sitting, so I can notice patterns like that, because if you do it in tiny little pieces, It's just like when you binge watch a show that's normally on weekly, and certain things that you notice that you didn't notice before because you had to wait a whole week and sometimes a whole summer in between for things to happen. It doesn't hit you, but like I think when binge watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, I noticed I think it was Riker maybe saying "what the hell" a lot, like a lot, and so it would just kind of these things would come up because the passage of time in between. Don't think about it; it doesn't linger with you. But when you just saw it in another episode, a half an hour, 45 minutes ago, and then you see it a half hour, 45 minutes later, when the next one's gotten started, the things themselves apparent.
Yeah, you start to you definitely spot repetition, and that was extremely helpful. That was just so helpful for me. And I actually went back in a few other things that I've written and said, oh my God, I do this everywhere, because I already do that with the word that. I try to do go through and find all the places where I've used that, because again, these are all perfectly good words. It's just that when you see a lot of them, it means you're not using other idiomatic phrases, and you could use others. There's ways that, obviously, that we can vary our verbiage that makes things more interesting, and also the way dialogue goes. Educated people are going to speak one way. Uneducated people will speak another way. People who are not native speakers will speak a third way. And as writers, we have to take these things into consideration. And if we're using the exact same idiomatic expressions, whether it's the groom at the stable who never finished grade school versus the Harvard-educated son of the wealthiest person in the city versus the inside servants, that doesn't work.
Yeah, and at the same time, you got to be careful that the pendulum doesn't swing the other way, too, to too much purple prose, because one of the things that I see a lot in student work, particularly, is that they will kind of overcomplicate the things that they say because they're trying to sound smart, or because their 10th grade English teacher told them before that they were being too repetitive and they needed to, quote, change it up. And here I am doing these podcast air quotes that you can't see again, because that's got to happen probably at least once per show. Although I think I got away without doing it last. But anyway, so, when you go through this and then you kind of have to redirect them back to the idea that, maybe the direct approach and just saying things, just say what it is kind of the better way to go. Just like some, I've seen panels with professional authors say, sometimes you just need to say said.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. This actually takes me back to when I was practicing law, because I handled construction cases a lot. And here we are. We're lawyers. We've got Juris Doctorates, which is basically the equivalent of a master's degree or an MBA. And we're talking to people very often who were not born in the United States, and very often who barely made it through high school, if they did at all. And I would see countless lawyers, oh God, you just want to strangle these people, who would say over and over again, prior to and subsequent to. And I learned, I think my first week practicing law, no, you say before and after.
Yeah. And I've noticed, too, since I've started doing a lot more academic writing, my go-to word seems to be thus, and I need to stop that. I noticed it after rereading my written prelims, which, that kind of wasn't really a thing that they really ding you for, at least not at my school, because they know that you have only 1 week to do a lot of writing. And of course, you're not going to be able to go through your usual writing process under those circumstances. So, nobody busted my chops for it, but just going through it now, trying to mine it for things for my proposal, sometimes it's cringeworthy.
You need to switch it up with nevertheless. That's a great long word, but it also sounds very purple prosy.
Or sometimes just so.
So tell me about. et cetera, et cetera. So shall we dive into a topic?
Yeah, I think our language lesson for the day is about Austin.
Thus and so, we are going to move on.
But hey, you learn stuff on this show.
See? There's a reason for this. Put this down on your resume. Or on ours, I don't know. Yeah, so tell me about what the hell's going on here with The Last Jedi?
Well, so last time we spent a lot of time talking about The Last Jedi, and there were still some more things that were kind of lingering since that time, because we had just devoted so much time to it, and it wasn't the Last Jedi show. But there were some things that I kind of wanted to come back to and flesh out a little more, and some things that we just didn't have a chance to talk about. Some of them are things that seem to kind of confuse viewers, things that I was seeing online and maybe hearing as I was leaving the theater a few times. Others were just things that maybe have come up since. So I started to touch on this last time, and then I kind of didn't really get to it where I wanted to. But one of the scenes that evoked a lot of controversy in The Last Jedi was when Leia gets sucked out into vacuum when the bridge of her ship is attacked. And she reaches out through the Force and facilitates her own rescue to get back into the ship and lives. Special effects wise, it wasn't the greatest thing in the world. It kind of had this Mary Poppins kind of appeal. But what I liked about it, though, was that it operated to subvert this lingering idea in the fandom that Leia never pursued any Jedi training. Now, Rian Johnson has gone on record saying that he wrote, or that scene was constructed, to show that Leia could reach out through the Force. It was a survival instinct thing. But since it never really explicitly says that in the movie, I think that there's room for an alternate reading in which we can imagine that maybe Luke did put her through some kind of Jedi training, because you have to imagine, obviously, as the films have displayed, there is lingering remnants of the Empire trying to make it, now it's like the Alt Empire or something, that's trying to take the galaxy back and try to take power back. So you got to know that somebody like Leia is going to have a target for her back for the rest of her life. So I can't imagine that her brother would leave her defenseless in terms of the Force. Like, he would make sure that she off. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think that fans have to kind of accept the fact that there's stuff that goes on that doesn't get filmed. And and as fan fiction writers, we have a tendency to sort of, oh my God, this wasn't filmed, so we're going to plug that in. But that there's a lot of things that are left implied that they don't really end up on the screen. But we're people of intelligence, and presumably we can make the logical leap, and it's not a very big leap; it's a very small jump actually. That says, if she could do something with the Force, it means she probably had some sort of refinement of her use of it, because otherwise as we learn in Return of the Jedi, you need the other one, The Empire Strikes Back. You learn that by having training, you can focus it better. You have, by having better control, you stop being undisciplined and sort of, all over the place, and instead you can aim, and you can work it so much better. And if she can work it better than somebody with no training, then by the transitive principle, we would assume that she's had some training. We should.
Yeah. I completely agree with everything that you just said. It makes absolute perfect sense. I think, though, that there is a faction of fandom out there and this is any fandom, that they're very literalist. And so they will take the fact that Rian Johnson said that it was just survival instinct in the most fundamental way, mean that Leia never had any training. And this is where we've talked about this concept before, this idea of death of the author, where just because an author or a filmmaker had some kind of intent when they created a work, it doesn't mean that they control what people do with it and how they interpret it while it's out in the wild. So while I advocate that we don't exclusively interpret and criticize works that way, because I do believe that the works themselves and the authors are products of the culture that produced them, and we have to kind of look at these things sort of ecologically. I do also think that in a lot of circumstances, especially in a situation like this where it's never definitively said on screen that she did or didn't have some kind of force training, I think that there's some room for death of the author in this particular instance. And so if J.J. Abrams wants to come along later on and say, well, she trained with Luke for 10 years, then there's still definitely room for that.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to write a backstory or like a flashback scene, I guess from her perspective, not from Luke's, if it could be in the 9th film, I remember back when we were in the swamps of Dagobah and he was showing me how to do XYZ, then hey, that's then there you go, you're set, folks. But if you don't get that, it's still highly plausible that there was some sort of means of learning how to focus, because you have something that's that can be used as a weapon, if nothing else, and you don't learn how to aim weapons, then they're pretty useless to you. So if she's shown to have the talent, which she is shown to have the talent at the end of the Empire Strikes Back, then it's criminal to not give her any training.
Exactly, and this kind of into a larger criticism. One of the criticisms I heard about this and about Luke Skywalker's ability to reach across the galaxy, form astral projection, in order to fool Kylo Ren and buy the remaining Resistance members time to where they were hiding. The complaint is that Leia's ability to survive in vacuum and this astral projection thing weren't, quote, set up before. I know, right? Before we saw it on the screen. Now, as far as the Luke thing and astral projection goes, in terms of, earlier in the film, in terms of Rey and Kylo Ren, it was set up that doing such a thing would kill a person trying to do it, which, we saw Luke die at the end. So that was the implication that we were supposed to take away, that, this astral projection thing was so hard that he evaporated and became one with the Force, just like Yoda and Ben Kenobi did. Rian Johnson has also gone on record and pointed out that, how much of this was set up when we saw Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back. Luke on Dagobah doing those giant force-enhanced leaps, like that wasn't established in the first Star Wars movie. So to argue that, we never saw Leia, show any kind of ability to use force to survive in vacuum. Well, okay, first of all, we kind of did, not to that extreme, but we know that she felt her husband die in the last movie.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in this movie, we know she felt Kylo Ren debating whether or not to kill her.
Okay.
She heard Luke call out to her on Bespin after he got his arm cut off and was dangling from a weather vane. So, she and Chewie piloted the Falcon to go rescue him. So we know that she has some innate ability to use the Force, whether she can control it at those points or not. So I would say that there is precedent that this talent, as you were saying, was trained and refined so that she could use it more effectively. I don't see the need to say, oh, by the way, people can astral project if they're strong enough in the Force in some previous movie in order to introduce Now, we've established that Luke is a powerful Jedi, albeit one that shut himself off from the Force after he inadvertently created Kylo Ren, but very powerful nonetheless. So the fact that people are saying that it wasn't set up or previously established kind of tells me that if that's your complaint, then you like things very simplistic and spoon-feedy, and maybe complex thought isn't you?
Well, I mean, and the other thing is when the Star Wars universe was introduced in 1977, right? There was no preliminary stuff, yet people had no problem following the story or what the Force was or what it could do and what, and how fast the ships could go and whatnot. And so if it bothers you that it wasn't presented before, just look at the film as being the first film in the series.
Yeah, and I don't know. It just to me, I just kind of feel like if that's the nature of your criticism, it kind of goes back to the thing about it being more about your expectations not being met than it is about anything inherently wrong with the film.
Yeah, well, this is also the gatekeeping that we've seen in the Star Trek fandom as well, which is it doesn't work for me. I don't like it. Therefore, the fandom doesn't like it.
Yeah, this idea that you speak with an authority that you don't have and you somehow represent the entire fandom.
Yeah, I just, no. No. The fandom's more diverse than that, and as is the Star Wars fandom, as is pretty much every fandom. If there's more than one person who's a fan of something, just two people can have different opinions on stuff. If you've got millions of people who like a fandom, then you've got to believe that they've all got their own take on it. And some of them are looking at that and saying, hey, this is awesome. I wasn't spoon-fed this. This is something that I had to make a conclusion over, and I'm really glad that they didn't treat us like idiots.
And speaking of being spoon-fed,
woohoo! Let's segue.
This actually ties into Luke and his astral projection. So after his ruse against Kylo Ren is over, and his sister and the other Resistance members escape with Rey in the Millennium Falcon. We see this moment where we see Luke sitting on a rock, and instead of being on the ocean world where he was hiding, we see him looking at a twin sunset of Tatooine. And a lot of people seem to be confused by this, and I hope that in the month that has interceded here, that they kind of understand it. But in case they don't, I'll explain it. Luke knew he was dying because, he had to be pretty worn out and used up after that complex astral projection thing. So, what do dying people do? Well, we say that their life flashes before their eyes. If they know it's coming, sometimes they try to say goodbye, which Luke kind of did with Leia earlier when he asked her the gold dice that used to be hanging on Solo's ship. Mm-hmm. So I think Luke took, what little strength he had left to go home and watch one last sunset, or he went on to become one with the Force. But it's very obvious that he's on Tatooine there. A lot of people didn't get it. They thought, oh, well, where did the second sun suddenly come from on this other planet? And
boy.
It was just kind of no-brainery. So I was kind of amused. I was alternately amused and annoyed. I just didn't think it was really that hard to figure out. But so in case you needed that help, he went home and said goodbye to home and watched one last sunset.
Okay, you can put that fan theory to bed, folks. We're all set.
Yeah, and also going along with the astral projection, Luke had shorter hair and a less gnarly beard during those scenes. And so some people were confused by that, and it's pretty obvious because when they actually did set that up. You just needed to think about it for a little while. That's what Luke looked like the last time Kylo Ren saw him, and it's also, by extension, what Luke looked like the last time Leia saw him. So if he's doing this very elaborate Jedi mind trick across galaxies across the galaxy and making people see him when he really isn't there, of course it's gonna evoke the image of him that they have in their minds. They're not really manipulating their minds to make them think they're seeing him.
Yeah, I mean, why, if, just sort of taking it as an almost scientific thing, if you were doing something that took an enormous amount of energy and you had the choice of either projecting your own choice of look or letting another person take on that burden and do that, you'd probably conserve your energy and let them do it.
Yeah, and they kind of did something with this in the original Star Trek series with the man trap and the salt vampire, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so McCoy saw, young and beautiful Nancy Crater because that's what she looked like the last time he saw her, whereas the other people who saw her saw what they had more imagined or what they expected a Nancy Crater to look like. So even though the film didn't go into it, I imagine Poe Dameron would have seen a different version of Luke still. I mean, if he's never seen a hologram or a photograph, he might, have Luke be, short, dark-haired, and missing some teeth. Who knows? But I kind of get the impression that everybody would see their last memory of him or just what they imagined he would have been.
I think that's very logical. You see what you want to see, and you're shown what you want to see.
And I think Leia immediately knew who and what she was dealing with, that Luke wasn't really there, that the metal dice really weren't real. And I think that partly too was kind of Luke subtly communicating that to her. But I think that she would have expected Luke to change in the interceding years, and when she didn't, that was probably her first tip-off as to what was going on.
Yeah, that something's weird here. I mean, if you and I looked like we did 20 years ago, I think we'd, that would be kind of strange. You can expect that.
So those were kind of like my last kind of threads that I wanted to tie together in terms of The Last Jedi, and I will just go back on record of saying that, this movie defied my expectations, and I felt like that this was a good thing. But I think that there's a faction of fandom that we need to talk about that
yes.
doesn't feel that way. Do you want to talk about that aspect?
Oh yes, and we see this in Star Trek as well, where there's a big pushback that we're not happy that the heroes and even the villains aren't all cis white men, and or maybe we could handle it if there was a woman in there, if she wasn't strong, if she was to be rescued, she trips over her high heels and has to be carried, or you got to pull her along by the hand kind of nonsense. And there's a large faction who think that by showing women with power and people of color as well, male and female, that they feel that it's emasculating, that white men are being shut out and put down, and and that they're not important and all of that, and this anger is misplaced. First off, recognize that you've kind of had the spotlight for a really long time. So if you're unable to share that with anybody else, that might say something about what you're like and what having the spotlight means to you. If that means shutting out other people, then that's it's misplaced. you've had 5,000, 6,000 years of culture, which has been for the most part white male centric, or at least male centric, and now we've got 2 years of it that's not quite so white male centric. I mean, at least in the sense of fairness, you got to say, well, okay, maybe we can cede some of this, but there's a butthurt section of the fandom. It is but a hurt section of both fandoms, by the way. But so men's right activists did their own cut of The Last Jedi, and they took out a bunch of stuff from both Leia and Laura Dern's character, and I'm totally blanking on her name.
Admiral Holdo.
Thank you. And did they knock out Rey and Rose as well?
I think so. I honestly, I couldn't bring myself to watch the thing because, first of all, to me, it's just blatantly obvious that this reaction to the threat of loss of privilege, and this is what people do when they feel like that, threatened. So if you're that threatened by a bunch of women, I don't really want to give your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is it's troubling that people are that hurt by this, that this bothers them so badly. Why should it?
And from what I understand, by the time they got done, so I kind of want to say that they did take out the Rose and Ray stuff, because by the time it was over, like, this movie clocked over 2.5 hours in theatrical release. Mm-hmm. And what I read in articles about it is that they were left with like 46, 47 minutes worth of footage.
So that should tell you something, about, and that also means that they took a chainsaw to it. And, if this bothers you so much, there's a lot of other things you can be a fan of.
Yeah, and it just kind of goes back to one of the links I shared with the last episode, and we talked about this for a little while while talking about The Last Jedi, about how toxic masculinity was the real bad guy in The Last Jedi, and I think that we're seeing a real-world manifestation.
Yeah, I think we are. That it's toxic masculinity has kind of come back to the fore again, and we're seeing it in both of these fandoms. That there's, oh my God, the women are they're so mean.
Yeah, it was such a trip too, because last year I took a rhetoric communication, and we're split up into two groups, and my group actually was working on alternative press and the way it discussed Star Wars The Force Awakens. So we looked at, left-leaning web publications, and we looked at right-leaning web publications. Ones on the right were just tripping me out. Like, even if they liked the movie, they had to, say things in there like, well, Leia dresses like an old lesbian, and
oh boy,
Rey isn't feminine enough, and it just the women characters are okay, but they've lost what makes women special and pretty and feminine, and reach through the screen and punch anybody through the nose so badly in all my life.
Yeah, that could be fun.
So, I'm just kind of thinking, again, if that's where you have to stoop to make a criticism, then I would question the legitimacy of your criticism.
Well, it also considering that a 2.5 hour film gets knocked down to 46 minutes because they're pulling out all of the female characters and all of their scenes and all of their lines. Somebody's got a hell of a lot of time on their hands too.
Yeah.
And that also kind of, I've always wondered about that. Is yes, we have a lot of leisure in our culture, but why are you wasting so much of your energy with this when you could be doing things that you enjoy? Why is this the thing that is taking up so much headspace? Why are you letting it?
Yeah, it really boggles the mind. I mean, I don't know. I kind of want to. There are those out there who would deny that male fragility is a thing, and I'm just here to tell you that if you're that a group of people would cut a movie down like this because they disliked the women so much, and they disliked the idea that women would be in charge and have some authority and agency. That right there is a living example of male fragility.
Shall we segue into the next one, which is a nice big example of it?
Oh, good God, yes. So in legal news.
Yes, so in legal news. So you may not have heard the name Rosemarie Acquilina before, but you'll hear it again, I'm sure. Rosemarie Acquilina she's a judge, and she was the judge in the Larry Nassar case. Larry Nassar is the U.S. Olympic Committee, U.S. Olympic Gymnastics sexual assault case. So people got a little nuts about maybe that's not the right word, but people got. Let me also give you a little bit of background on her. She is a circuit court judge in Ingham County in Michigan. Yeah. So according to Wikipedia, she got her bachelor's in English education and journalism at Michigan State in 1979, and her law degree at Cooley Law School in Lansing, Michigan, in 1984. She worked for 10 years for State Senator John Kelly, then as a partner in his firm. She also formed Acquilina Law, where she practiced in partnership with her sister. She hosted a syndicated talk show, Ask the Family Lawyer, joined the Michigan Army National Guard, became the state's first member of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, acquired the nickname Barracuda Acquilina. That's hard to say. Served for 20 years before retiring. She's an adjunct professor at Cooley Law School and at Michigan State University College of Law. She ran unsuccessfully for the Michigan State Senate in the 1990s. In 2004, she was elected judge at the 55th Michigan District Court, and in November 2008, judge of the 30th Circuit Court for Ingham County.
And I'll just add that this is happening in my backyard of where I grew up. So Ingham County is right next to Livingston County, which is where my hometown is. So, all the time growing up, until I entered my adult life, everything that we did practically revolved around the Lansing area and all of this. So this is.
Yeah, this is local, and I keep saying Ingram, and it's Ingham, and I'm sorry. So anyway, it's just last week actually, which is during the week of January the 21st. So the Nassar case, he was accused in both federal and state court, and the federal case already went down, and he was already guilty there. He was already sentenced there. What happened last week was the sentencing in the state case. He pled guilty. That's very important. Keep that in front of your minds, folks. He pled guilty, so he voluntarily said, "Yeah, I'm guilty." But he only pled guilty to a few of the cases. Now to sort of back up a little bit on this. For several years, over 30 years, which is frightening in the length of time, he was team doctor for the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team. And so these are young girls that usually you age out of the sport by the time you're about 21, 22 years old. So we're talking about girls who were probably between about the ages of 13 and 18 to 19 at the most. So the vast majority of them are minors. Doctors, obviously, they see us at our worst. They see us naked, okay? And yeah, that's to be expected. But he went further than this. There wasn't just fondling. Apparently, there was penetration as well. I don't know the precise details, and we've got a particular rating, so I'm not going to go into them anyway. But it's easy enough to Google this stuff. These girls were victimized. For decades, they complained, and their complaints fell on deaf ears. Part of that blame should be fallen at the feet of the U.S. Olympic Committee. Part of it should be against U.S. gymnastics. Part of it should be falling at the feet of Michigan State University, because everybody liked the fact that gymnastics is big money, big sport, because people love it. And when a girl can become like an American sweetheart kind of girl, then much like figure skating, there's big bucks and endorsements, and you want to be a part of this. You want to be part of this factory that churns out these girls over and over again, gets them onto the balance beam or the uneven bars and whatnot. The floor exercises, and they make their mark, and they're and I mean, I still remember the name Olga Korbut. Okay, who was Russian, who competed for the Russians. Olga Korbut. This is like 1976. All right, that's how long ago that is. But I still remember who that person was. If you ask me about the names of pretty much anybody else who was in the 1976 Olympics except for Mark Spitz, I would not be able to tell you their names.
Yeah, my name recognition actually goes back to figure 70s, like for Dorothy Hamill and Linda. No, I'm sorry, Peggy Fleming is who I was trying to think of. So and I was a little girl in the 70s. But they were kind of like the ones who were maybe headed for the wiggy. My biggest memory though of any is from, I believe it was 19 Olympics. Breton. And yeah, and so she just had this cute little short pixie cut and just this smile that just radiated wholesomeness and sincerity, and I believe she did make it to the Wheaties box. I mean, it just gymnastics is a big way to get that name recognition that you're talking about.
And it's also it's a female sport, and that's part of it too, is that the men don't really compete on a level playing field for gymnastics. I mean, although yes, there is a men's gymnastics, but they don't seem to get the kind of incredible press and pressure, for that matter, that the girls do. So they're under an enormous amount of pressure, and they're being abused, and they're telling people in authority. They're telling their parents, they're telling their coaches, they're telling people from the USOC, and saying, this guy is he touched me in places that were inappropriate without me inviting him. And, by the way, even if they had invited him, if they were under 18, it wouldn't have mattered. All right. So, so this is going on. It's going on for decades. And, if you don't want to believe somebody or you're not sure about credibility, maybe the first one or two can go by and you can say, okay, they're cranks or this or that, or they got some other agenda. When it's going on for decades, no, you lose that presumption. It should be gone. Now you're willingly closing your eyes to this. So he did this. He pled guilty. He actually pled guilty to only about 5 or 7, I think it was, of these cases. But something like 165 girls, or now women, came forward and presented impact statements saying, this is what happened to me. Can you please take this into consideration when you are sentencing him? So his sentencing hearing, it was expected, this is all expected to go down in like 3 days. It took a week because of all the people who were talking. And my understanding is that Judge Acquilina was also reading a bunch of this stuff as well. And so there's this very long parade almost of people saying, you did this, you did this, you did this. And Nassar sent letters to the court, which is his right. And one of them was, he said it would be mental cruelty for him to have to listen to all of these victim statements. And of course, the judge was having none of that.
Shut the front door.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, like that. Okay. Yeah, dude, you did this and you don't want to hear about it now? Yeah, suck it up and deal. You idiot.
Mental cruelty.
Yeah. So she read, I know that there's a bunch of gifs out there where she's just throwing a piece of paper. That's not the only thing that happened. She actually, it's a bunch of pieces of paper stapled together. That's a letter that he wrote to her, in support of his, you can't really say appeal, but in support of his plea. And she read pretty liberally from it in court. So she didn't just toss it. She really did read from it. So when you're just looking at the GIF, it looks like she just discarded it. That's not really the whole truth. She did read from it. And everything she read from it was a lot of I. And,
of course.
When we read this sort of stuff, it's language is telling. It's telling, and when you're in a sentencing hearing, what job one should be is showing remorse.
Yes, and
he never did. He doesn't do it in his letters. He doesn't do it anywhere. So she discards this and basically says, you're. So what she gave him was well within her abilities to do so. He could have gotten anywhere between 40 and 175 years. I'm going to explain why you give a huge amount of years in a moment, by the way. But so what she decided to do was she instead gave him 20 years that would be served consecutively. So they would be in order. So it's not that he could fulfill all 20 year, 3 times 20 within a 20-year period. Instead, he would have to fulfill a single 20-year period, and then a second one, and then a third. The truth is, he's never going to get to that because he's got 25 years already in Fed, and he's 52 years old. So if he makes it that long, which he wouldn't, he's not going to make it to over 100. That's not going to happen, or over 70. I don't even think that's going to happen. Then even if she had only given him 20 years, which would not be within her purview, he probably still wouldn't make that. He's dying in prison. The question is whether it's in federal pen or it's in state. That's obvious. He's dying in prison. She says to him, one of the things that was quoted from her saying was, "I've just signed your death warrant." Well, that's kind of true, and it's kind of, it's a little misleading, because yes, she signed his death warrant, but so did the federal judge. It's not just her saying, "I'm doing this to you." It's that, the sentencing guidelines are doing this to him as well.
I'm doing this to you right now.
Yeah.
So somebody else did this to you earlier. I'm doing it to you right now.
Yeah. And, and I know that there was a lot of people who felt that she was very unprofessional because she was saying, that I wish I could have given you, more than this, but, in the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution, we're not allowed to give you cruel and unusual punishment. So she said some things that were not very nice to him. And people on like Fox News and Washington Post and Time, they're saying, "Oh my God, she wasn't nice to the serial rapist." You people have never been in a criminal courtroom before. I have. You know what happens in sentencing when somebody's guilty is that the judge reads them the riot act. They pretty much always do. They're doing that partly because they kind of want to, get it out there that this was despicable what you did. But they also are very mindful of the people who are in the audience. Very often are people who are family and friends of this defendant, of this person who's now being sentenced. So they're telling those people as well. They're telling this person's children, their parents, their siblings, their corner grocer, or whoever the hell is there. They're saying to them, "This guy's bad, and you supported him, and he's a bad person. So maybe you should think about what that means. And maybe you should reconsider supporting him."
One of the things that came to mind as you were saying that is, oh, well, boo-hoo, she wasn't very nice to him, right? But I think that these are the same people who also support, prisoners getting nothing but stale bologna sandwiches for every meal and no TV and no weight room and all this kind of stuff because prison is supposed to suck.
Yeah,
so I think that there is some systemic misogyny at work there because number one, I don't think that they would have said that if a male judge had said exactly the same thing. I think that it's context dependent, and I think it's hinging on the fact that this is a woman judge calling this monster out for crimes that he committed against women and little girls.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking about the prison system when I was thinking over what we were going to talk about today. And the prison system is in the Western world, not just in the United States, is in really weird shape because everybody knows that prisoners murder each other, they rape each other, they assault each other. And yes, there's a very strong implication in what Judge Acquilina is saying, is that you're going to die in prison and not necessarily in a hospital bed or in your bed. Yeah, we know that happens. That happened to Jeffrey Dahmer. He was killed by a fellow inmate. That's not a failing of the judge, though. The fact that the judge mentions this as being a very real possibility doesn't mean that she's necessarily condoning that that's going to happen. But we all know that it does happen. But whose fault is that? The fault is in the people who are running the prison, really. The way that we run prisons is and the way we do punishment is really strange here because we're kind of learning. I think we're learning that incarceration doesn't work for a lot of people. And what we are learning and what we continue to learn is that for folks, particularly who are not violent offenders, and this guy would be considered violent because rape is a violent crime. But for people who are not violent offenders, when they get shoved into the regular prison population, that doesn't make them any better. That tends to make them worse. It tends to turn them into repeat offenders. And if this, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead and then I'll say my thing.
Oh, okay. And when we split up the population better and we say, okay, well, you did things that were bad, but you weren't violent about it, like Bernie Madoff, let's say, that, yeah, we do want to punish you. Yes, you did bad things. And we definitely want you to pay for your crimes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to suffer for your crimes, quote unquote. We have all these weird philosophies about punishment and prisons, and prisons used to be called penitentiaries, and the reason why is because it meant that you were supposed to be made penitent. You were supposed to learn to atone for your sins, and we don't really do that so much anymore. These days, we have a tendency to warehouse people and to separate them from the regular population of the world. And then for the ones who are released back into society, then we wonder why the hell they reoffend. And very often the reason is because we haven't given them any tools for living in the real world because we've continually separated them from it. And something has to change. I definitely don't have all the answers, but something probably should change. And in particular for people who aren't violent, there's got to be some better way to make it that if they've done something bad, but it isn't so super bad, to keep them from getting to the next step and becoming like this.
Well, I mean, you said pretty much, a lot of what I was about to say. There's a reason why we refer to it as the prison industrial complex, and that's because a lot of prison has become privatized, and it's only profitable if we put bodies in it, right? So
Yes.
it's been at least since the late 60s, early 70s, that there's been any focus on the rehabilitation aspect of our criminal justice system. A lot of what little rehabilitation we have is either a joke because nobody takes it seriously, or because it's so severely underfunded that it can't possibly work. And so just keeping a person behind bars and taking their freedom isn't necessarily going to solve the problem, because either you're going to build a bigger, stronger, smarter offender who's going to come out and re-offend because he or she doesn't have the social support necessary to rejoin society in a good, productive way, because we've just fetishized this idea that we all deserve our pound of flesh from somebody who has committed an offense against society. And I don't know if we've ever gone into this on the show the couple of times that we've talked about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I kind of was making a pretty big defense for the Spike character, because I'm a hardcore Spuffy shipper. And a lot of the fandom discourse surrounding that is, if you support Spuffy, then you support rape culture, because Spike tried to assault Buffy in her bathroom when she broke off the relationship And, as a result of that, like Spike realized that he screwed up. And yes, he was still looking at it through this haze of evil, being a vampire. But within the story world, he realizes he did wrong. Still wants Buffy to love him. He realized, that he has transgressed against her, although he probably doesn't realize at the time exactly how badly he did. But somewhere in that evil little mind of his, he sends out that in order to, number one, be worthy of her, and number two, to be a good man, he needs to have his soul restored. So unlike Angel, who had his soul restored as a curse, so that way he would feel all of the pain and all of the awful things that he's caused other people for the rest of his unnatural life, Spike goes out there and fights for his soul. So it's kind of this redemption arc in that, he definitely can't take back what he did, but he atones for what he did. He also processes it a lot better than Angel did, because he realizes that he can't take these things back. He can just go forward and be better than he was before. So the way this kind of relates to the prison conversation that we're having is that in our society, we kind of taken away, especially when it comes to sex crimes. They're very taboo, and we kind of don't have this attitude that, number one, someone who is a sex offender could, or any kind of offender, and even especially the nonviolent ones, we treat them like scumbags, because we don't really wrap our heads around the fact that they can pay their debt to society.
Yes.
In other countries, and I remember when I took the psychology of atypical sexuality as an undergrad, we had a guest speaker from New Zealand, and at that time they were actually having better results than the United States at preventing recidivism, because, at the time it wasn't about shaming the hell out of people. And again, this wasn't like somebody on the magnitude of what we're talking about with Nassar. We're talking about, somebody who, flashed somebody on a playground or something like that, like little bit lower on the scale there. But, they found that, if you focus on therapy, education, rehabilitation, and also once they're back among the population, social support, which means not barring them from holding down a decent job and not barring them from access to resources.
Yeah.
They don't re-offend.
Wow, what a wild concept.
What a concept. But Americans don't like that. Americans don't like that because they want the retribution. They want it doesn't give them the warm and fuzzy feeling. And it's only been within the last couple of years, I think, that New Zealand has even instituted a sex offender registry. But I think that that's for like the worst of the worst. Like, here you get treated the same whether you're a Nassar or somebody who got caught peeing in an alley behind the club because the line was too long for the bathroom at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. We have a degree problem here in the United States, and and the more that we throw everybody into the same bucket, the more they become the same. And what that means is that the people who are in there who are not really big time offenders and who have no desire to reoffend and who are nonviolent, those are not the people with the upper hand, and those are not the people who are influencing everybody. Those are the people who are getting influenced. They're getting influenced by these, assuming that they survive their incarceration, which again is a shameful and horrible thing that happens at all. But we have lost sight of what to do afterwards, and if we're not going to support criminals afterwards, then why are we letting them out at all?
Yeah, and it just, statistically, and just even with anecdotal evidence, the war on drugs is a failure, but it's never going to go away, I feel, because, again, prison is profitable, and the, quote, drug war supplies plenty of bodies to keep going.
Yeah, and the number of people, the number of people in prison in the United States has gone down in pretty much every state. And I was reading a study recently, and now I can't remember where the hell it was, but it said like the 10 states that had the most reduction in imprisonment also had the most reduction in crime, and and I don't mean that it was that there were fewer criminals and so there were fewer imprisonments. It was more that what they were showing was actually was kind of the reverse, that there were fewer people going to jail. And that, but that still didn't, but you didn't end up with more people offending because there were fewer people going to jail. So basically, the point being, I know I'm saying this really badly, but the point being that by shoveling everybody off to jail, it didn't prevent people from offending. That being afraid of going to jail was not enough to keep people from offending. And in fact, when criminals weren't going to jail quite so much, when there were other programs, when they were given community service, when they were given rehabilitation for addicts and things like that, and job training, that by getting those alternatives, which are certainly far nicer, that didn't mean that all these other people out in the regular population of the world suddenly said, aha, it's awesome. Now we can go out and we can offend and do all sorts of horrible things. It didn't do that at all.
Yeah, that's not how human psychology works. And I'm going to tell you, somebody like a Nassar, who is obviously pretty narcissistic. I mean, if you listen to that letter he wrote, the whole I thing, narcissists don't care about other people. So the threat of jail isn't really going to be enough to stop them because it's all about them and not what they're doing. They don't even see what they're doing to other people as a crime, for one thing. Mm-hmm. For another thing, in terms of like other types of crimes, often you're dealing with desperation, and it's the desperation that comes with poverty and systemic oppression. And so as long as we have those two things, you're still going to have people driven to do things that are against the law, either for their survival or for the survival of somebody else, or, for whatever reason. So until we solve those problems, we're not really going to solve crime. But right now, again, because we profit so much off of, and I'll say it again, the prison industrial complex, there's no incentive to take those things away.
Yeah, I've seen a number of programs that are just these lovely things, and you really wish there were more of them. Like prisoners who have jobs that are things like where they train service dogs and stuff like that, and where they have other kinds of work, and these are people who are getting some pride in their life, and that they want to do a good job, because nobody's ever told them before in their lives that when you do a good job, it makes you feel good.
Absolutely. And I remember, like, ages ago, like maybe even 20 years ago by now, I had watched one of those like 60 Minutes, 2020 kinds of shows and stuff. And they did this segment on nonviolent criminals. So these were like mostly people who were in jail for drugs and stuff. They were going through a program where they were learning how to become pet groomers. And what they were doing was taking, these animals that had been rescued, and a lot of them were in bad shape, full of mats. They needed, baths. They needed haircuts. They needed defleeting. So the prisoners would do that. And I tell you, I watched this thing and I just cried because, number one, they were talking about how it kind of reconnected them with the idea of having compassion for somebody or something else. They felt needed and worthwhile. They connected with these animals, and it built them a skilled trade. And the one thing that I remember coming up the most often was the animals didn't judge them.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of saying that maybe we need to rethink some of this stuff.
Heavy thoughts for
what a tangent.
Yeah, I know. It's a hell of a tangent, but we talk about law, and part of that is punishment. It's not just crime; it's a punishment too.
And just you learn stuff on our show.
So let's fluff it back up to some January fandom roundup. How about that?
Yeah. Let's come back to the fun things. So, Riverdale has taken an interesting turn before the mid-season hiatus. If you've been following, they had this killer called the Black Hood, and he was finally revealed and dealt with. So now they've got a new story arc, and I was kind of impressed as I was catching up this week. So I'm caught up through this week's episode, and they're taking on a particularly interesting social justice issue to me, in terms of the wrongs done to Native American and Indigenous people, and how that factors into systemic racism and poverty. And this is all done through kind of like a Founders Day Heritage Festival that's happening in the town of Riverdale. And so it's one of those things where history's been whitewashed. So the hero that founded the town actually was responsible for massacring all the Native people who lived there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, in the name of, I'll just come out and say it, white settler conquest.
Yeah.
So they're kind of dealing with that, but also through the character of Jughead, who thinks he's doing the right thing by writing this expose. Is actually it actually kind of had the effect of making it worse for the people who have been wronged and did this thing that they didn't want him to do. So it kind of also highlights the difference of who really gets to call themselves an ally. And I'll give you a hint. If you belong to the dominant culture, you do not get to call yourself an ally. it's the people who belong to oppressed cultures, they decide whether or not your behavior is allyship or not. So it kind of addresses that issue. And so I thought that was really, really interesting.
Huh. And it's like Riverdale has gotten into a depth that, considering its original source material, is just utterly unexpected and pretty awesome.
Yeah. In fact, one of my best friends, her daughter, was always into Archie comics and read them and collected them. And actually, because it's kind of different from the comics, she actually does not like the Riverdale show. But for me, because I never really read the comics. I mean, I had a couple when I was a kid, but that was about it. And I think I watched the Archie's cartoon that was on TV in the early 70s. But that's the extent of my knowledge of Archie's world. So for me, I kind of like the teen soap spin. I kind of hate myself for how much I like it sometimes. But it's interesting characters and compelling stories and good writing. So why the hell not? This is how I unwind after a full day of thinking stuff, and then they make me think some more because they have really well structured mysteries and things in there. So. It's pretty interesting.
That's fantastic, and speaking of things that make you think, Star Trek Discovery has spun into a mirror universe, the mirror universe. Lots of interesting stuff going on there. Trying not to be spoilery, but one thing that Michael Burnham says, which I found really interesting, and this is always the way I've thought about the mirror, is she says. She sees fear everywhere, and that you always have to be on your guard, that you have to pass for, you have to look like you're obedient, you have to look like you're ready at a moment's notice, but the truth is everybody's terrified underneath.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really interesting because, the mirror universe has always been presented as a pretty oppressive culture. And now through Star Trek Discovery, they're being a little less coy and indirect about what exactly is going on over there. And so for our listeners who maybe didn't get to us through Star Trek fandom, what the mirror universe is, it's a parallel universe where our doppelgangers exist, but it's quite a different world. So whereas the Federation is a democracy, it's the Terran Empire in the very oppressive. It's pretty racist. They hate try to subjugate and dominate all species. So the Vulcans are not their allies there. The Andorians, the Tellarites, like any of the alien species that we've come to know and love through Star Trek are now either slaves or they're rebels trying to overthrow the Empire. So the Empire hates anything that is not human. So Discovery has gone over to the mirror. We're learning some interesting things.
Yeah, it's instead of looking like this campy romp like it can, it's obvious this is a military dictatorship. When the Enterprise Mirror Universe episodes came out, I thought they were rather well done as well because they were because the perspective was from the Mirror Universe. It had nothing to do with ours. So you saw just straight into what was going on in their universe, and you saw how people would scheme, and because you always had to try to be getting ahead. But Discovery takes this and it amplifies it, it turns it up to 11, which is basically what Discovery has done all along, is it's taken Star Trek ideas, and in particular Enterprise. It's a very straight shot sequel to Enterprise, and it's taken a lot of their ideas and it's amped them up to infinity, and it's saying, okay, it's not just that people are violent, it's that this is an entirely oppressive society. This is Hobbesian in the extreme. This is kill or be killed, eat or be eaten, and quite literally. And yeah, I did have to get that in there. And there's there's horrible stuff in there, but there's also things that might be a little bit idealist in there, but maybe not. People have all sorts of interesting theories about Captain Lorca, and I don't want to get spoilery, so I really don't want to talk about what was revealed about him last week. But at the same time, the impression that I get is that there are people who are basically, I don't want to say good in the mirror universe, but who are who have some nobility and some morality, and or at least trying to do the right thing. And those people on our side of the pond, their actions we would still see as evil, but in their universe, when you parse it out and you build in the shades there, it's the same thing like what we were saying about the prison system, where we throw everybody into the same bucket. You can't throw everybody in the mirror universe in the same bucket either, because there are people who are truly evil, who are out for anything. Hoshisato kind of comes to mind there, but there's also people who are kind of maybe scheming a bit, but they're also in the back of their minds, they're saying, this can't continue. There's, I need to at least protect myself, protect me and mine in some way.
And that harkens back to Mr. Spock, to the very first time he ever visited the Mirror Universe, which was in the 1960 episode Mirror. Spock was there. He was Mirror Universe Spock, and so I guess given the story, the story world that's been built around the Mirror Universe since, the Vulcans were a subjugated species, I guess maybe it's his half-humanness that allowed him to be in the company of humans on the ISS Enterprise the first time around. But, even though he's working for this corrupt empire, he still retains best of what made Spock. Kirk was able to appeal to his sense of logic, and the thing is that logic was the same here as it was there. So, we learn later on in other incarnations of Star Trek that Spock started something, and it kind of took off for a little while there.
Yeah, that there's certain things that are universal, and that there even can be, in this lawless place, there could still be people who are trying to do something that maybe isn't good, but at least is has got some sort of positivity to it. And even if that's only for the somewhat selfish idea of making sure that they and the people who they care about stay alive, even if that it's for selfish motivations, that at least somebody's trying to do something that is kind of in the realm of what's right. These are violent episodes. I think that's very realistic. Actually, it's a military dictatorship. You would have all sorts of horrible things. I mean, we've had dictatorships here on Earth, in the real world, and what happens is a bunch of people disappear into the Gulag under Stalin, and over 1 million people are killed by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. That's what happens in dictatorships in the real world.
Well, it's happening even now in modern day Russia. I mean, as some people might know, because I've talked about it before. I've done some research on the Russian punk band Pussy Riot and their fandom, and as I'm reading background on this, trying to putting there, journalists kept disappearing, and when they were found, a lot of times they were murdered for reporting on and speaking out against the Putin administration and standing up for the rights of women and the LGBTQ community, freedom of speech. If you protest, if you government even now, you're going to go away. That's one of the reasons why Pussy Riot, found it worth risking going to prison, and 3 members of them did go to prison earlier in this decade, in order to protest their corrupt government. So if you think that it's something that happened during World War II era, or if it's something that happens, in whatever you want to call it, the Third World or the Global South, it's happening now.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Oh, no, and I was just going to say that I like what you said when you highlighted what Michael said about all of it being motivated by fear. I mean, I think that we see it, a degree of it, even in this country with the trends towards isolationism and in racism in our country. It just, when you're afraid all the time, you take these extreme measures to try to control everything. And it's very easy to see how a mirror universe military dictatorship come to be.
Oh yeah, and the mirror universe is very, very, very Hobbesian kind of an idea, and Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher, and in the Leviathan he talks about he says that life is short, brutal, and nasty, and that's exactly what the mirror is like.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I am going to transition to something kind of spoilery. And here's the thing, and caveat out there: if you hate spoilers, if this is going to be a day wrecker, stop listening now. But personally, I don't try to hold back a lot from spoilers myself, because a lot of spoiler culture actually operates to silence critique, whether it means to or not. And I feel that critique is part of an important thing that we do here at Semantic Shenanigans. So in the name of critique, I'm going to spoil some things here.
Go for it.
Okay, so now that we're in the mirror universe, one of the consequences of that is that Wilson Cruz's character, Dr. Culber, has died, and he a key part of really the first out gay relationship on Star Trek Discovery. So the show has taken a lot of flack because there's this assumption that it's gone along with the bury your gays trope, and we've talked about this very issue with Emmy Marshall, who is very active in Days of Our Lives fandom, and so we've spent a lot of time talking about this subject and why the bury your trope is kind of it needs to go away, is basically what needs to happen. It just, those of you who don't know what that means, it's when you have a token gay character that exists only to die. And so it kind of operates as this othering mechanism that treats gay people as less than compared to their straight counterparts. That said, Dr. Culber dies, but the showrunners assure us that it's not the trope, and I think it's worth highlighting that the main showrunner is an out gay man himself, so I don't think that he would intentionally do anything to kind of like harm the representation of the LGBTQ community, particularly in a property that he's in charge of right now, which is Star Trek. So we've been assured by him and by Wilson Cruz that this is not the last that we've seen of Dr. Culber. In fact, he made an appearance last week. But there's also the hint that maybe he'll be back for future episodes. Maybe they will have a way to undo this. There's been some grumbling in the fandom that that if he does come back, then it's kind of like this cheap magic reset button kind of thing that you see a lot in science fiction. But my thing is that like it is science fiction, so if they use a sci-fi solution, why are you going to get mad?
Yeah, this is what you're watching,
Yeah. Have you not seen Star Trek before? Nobody in Star Trek has to stay dead. We've proven that over and over again. So, the showrunners, they've been on the After Trek program, and they've been on Entertainment Weekly. They assure us that it does serve a story purpose, and part of that story purpose is to show how deep the love is between Stamets and Culber, and just how rich and awesome that relationship is. So I don't know. I think I have faith that they will resolve this in a satisfying way. and I kind of see the perspective of kind of like, on the one hand, you want LGBTQ as well as others of historically oppressed communities to be represented in a positive way and not to be tokens that are easily thrown away. And I totally get that. But on the other hand, I think that they're coming from the perspective of, not giving them like bulletproof story armor because of, they belong to have a certain sexual orientation or whatever. So again, kind of like what I was saying in the last show about, people of color being forced to kneel before the First Order in Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I think that this is just kind of a natural consequence of diversifying your cast and the bad guys being bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. If your cast is diverse and somebody ends up dying, and a character dies, well, and then kind of by definition that a diverse character is going to die, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just that when you roll the dice and you've got 10 characters and 8 of them are diverse, well, yeah, kind of it's going to be a lot more likely that they're going to that somebody who's diverse is going to be the one to kick the bucket. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's if it's got if there's a meaning to it in the story, and that's the truth about killing off any character. You shouldn't just be slitting the throat of a character. That's a horrible image. Sorry about that.
Right.
It just for kicks. That shouldn't be happening.
On the show. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's a bad way to treat characters. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to point out that the showrunners have even said that Dr. Culber didn't die because he was the gay guy and disposable. He actually died because at the time he was the smartest person on the ship, and he was starting to figure out another character's secret, and so he could have very easily blown the whole thing apart, and he was on the verge of doing so right then and there, and then things happened, and he died as a result of the thing that he was discovering, not as a result of his sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. Which is comforting to me. That there was a purpose behind his death, and it was a very good purpose behind his death. The other thing is that they have said in Aftercheck that he doesn't have a mirror counterpart, or at least we never see it. And I like that idea very much. That first off, that he's pure, that he's somebody who's got motives, who we can trust, and also that it tends to explain the difference between Prime Universe Stamets and Mirror Universe Stamets, because they're both smart scientists, but Prime Universe has somebody love him, and that gentles you, and Mirror Universe does not, and so he doesn't have his little tribe to defend. He's just got himself.
And what you were just saying about purity, the thing that just registered in my head. So, I used to be very active in teaching film appreciation students as a supplemental instruction leader for that class of my alma mater. And so one of the things that we learn about in that class is on mise en scène, which has to do with what you see, like how things are arranged, and it goes beyond into like wardrobe, hair, makeup, set decoration, props.
Yeah, his wardrobe.
Yeah, so, here's the thing, like, we're used to the idea of doctors, like, in these white lab coats, so it makes sense that the medical team would wear white. But when you consider that Culber, until recently, has been the representative of the medical team, always in this bright white uniform, like, that's not an accident. That doesn't just signify him as a doctor, but white also brings with it those connotations of purity. And so I think that, I've seen the interviews with their head wardrobe person on Aftertrack, from week to week, and she's smart. She designs and chooses the wardrobe very purposefully. So I think that there is no accident that the medical uniforms are all bright white when they've been historically blue, because he is supposed to be so.
Yeah, exactly. That it showcases goodness, and also the whole cleanliness and next to godliness, but also that he's untouched by the violence.
Yeah, so I would say that Dr. Culver is anything but the trope that we've seen before.
Which is awesome. So, how about the X-Files? What's going on there?
Oh my god, be still my shipper heart. So in addition to being shipper trash for Han and Leia, I'm shipper trash for Mulder and Scully. So last season kind of saw some disappointment among X-Files fans, particularly those who ship Mulder and Scully. Sorry, I was conflating two things at once because there's Mulder and Scully, but I was about to say how instead of like the usual portmanteau where they combine names, the Mulder and Scully relationship is MSR for Mulder-Scully relationship. So both of those things tried to come out at the same time.
Whoops.
So last season, which was actually 2 years ago and just a short season of 6 episodes, a lot of MSR fans were really, really disappointed because through the end of the original run of the X-Files, we discover that Mulder and Scully not only have been intimate, but they parented a child together.
Whoops.
Yeah, so that was pretty awesome. Scully had Mulder's baby, but then, because of the whole like contract dispute, craziness that was going on behind the scenes, David Duchovny was hardly in the last season at all until the very end, and it was just this tragic storyline where Scully had to give the baby up for adoption because there was always a target on her back, there was a target on his back, so in her mind, without Mulder there to help her, it was just kind of the best way that she could hide him and take him in line of fire. And then Mulder comes back for the finale and give up their child. There was a movie in between where we learned that if they weren't currently married, they at least had been, or there's some suggestion of relationship trouble that seemed to be getting resolved by the end of that second film. So we come to season 10, and the relationship clearly hasn't worked out, and so that was very, very disappointing. Also, they kept dangling the carrot of the child that they had together. His name is William. So they kept hinting that, they might go look for William, which kind of like among the fandom opened up all of these like ethical issues and questions. And because, if William is happily situated with a family and wrong for Mulder and Scully to let go. So last season ends on a cliffhanger. This season, they completely undo that cliffhanger and just do everything they can to invalidate that, which ended up as a big WTF moment for fans. But what even was worse, and I'm going to spoil here again in the name of critique, the main bad guy throughout all of the X-Files, his CG Bender, but like he's never really had a name through most of the show, so they would either call him the cigarette smoking man or cancer man. Mm-hmm. And so he was always that shadowy figure subverting the government, and he's always seen smoking a cigarette. So in this episode, Cancer Man claims that he's actually the father of Scully's baby, that he's William's father and not Mulder.
Okay.
If you haven't been following the show, what you have to know too is that Cancer Man is also Mulder's biological father. So he's not the father that raised Mulder. Mulder's mother was getting a little something on the side. And so it's like this whole twisted thing. But what this has led to, though, is some pushback from fans because this really raises issues, again, about consent.
Yeah.
And the violation of Scully's body and you know, that standing in for like women in general. So, you know, we know that Cancer Man kind of had a thing for Scully. There was an episode where he kind of kidnapped her and they spent a lot of time together, and you know, it was clear that he admired her in perhaps a romantic way. So just this idea that Cancer Man, number one, would be William's father is kind of icky. And especially like because Scully was rendered theoretically unable to have children because of alien and government experiments done on her and all this kind of stuff. So the idea that she and Mulder could have conceived a child out of love and you know, had this miracle of birth was just kind of like a beautiful, beautiful thing for MSR fans. And so number one, to have that undermined by Chris Carter writing that Cancer Man is William's father was just unspeakable. And then the idea that, you know, he violated her somehow is just terrible. So Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files, and you know, the main person behind it all, he defends this choice in a very tone-deaf kind of way, basically saying that Cancer Man has impregnated her with science.
Oh, for fuck.
And that he didn't rape her. So the idea that, you know, again, like just kind of this tone deafness to the idea that, you know, a science experiment does not make it less of a violation.
Yeah, this is just icky.
It's gross. Now, the other thing, though, and again, I'm not as mad as some people are, because at the very beginning of the episode, you know how they have the opening credits and then it ends with "I want to believe." Mm-hmm. This one ends with "I want to lie," and we know that we can't trust Cancer Man. He is definitely not a reliable narrator. Okay, so he will say anything to manipulate Mulder, to manipulate Scully, to manipulate the government, to manipulate anybody he has to. So I think that the revelation that William is his child could be a complete fabrication done to kind of like start some dominoes tipping that he wants to tip.
And who knows, maybe he's quote unquote the adopted parent.
Right. So, you know, well, actually, no, they kind of show it at the end, like who adopted William. And it was like it was like kind of like this nice little couple in like, I don't know, Indiana or Iowa, someplace with more corn than even I have. But the idea being was that it was safe, it was wholesome, and there was lots of corn, middle America kind of.
And he was going to be okay. Yeah.
And he was going to be okay. So, you know, I mean, who knows? Cancer Man might have gotten his hands on him later on, but that was certainly not the implication with the series finale back in the early 2000s. So, we have the rest of the season to find out really what the truth is there. But, you know, it just kind of left a lot of fans, particularly women, with just a really icky taste in their mouth, that the idea that this was an okay thing for Chris Carter right and to put on the air.
Yeah, that's strange.
It gets better though.
Okay.
Because again, be still my shippy heart. So I'm a little bit behind. I'm only into episode 3 of this, but they have revisited Mulder-Scully relationship. The second episode of the season has some teases about what their relationship was like, and apparently not only, you know, did they have a romantic relationship, whether or not they were married, but apparently they got their freak on, which was brought out by a joke about handcuffs, which was really awesome. But in episode 3, got busy and it was awesome. They didn't show a love scene, but everything that you needed to know was there, and so it seems that romance is rekindling.
Ah.
So I'm very happy about that. So we'll probably have more to say about the X-Files next time, but that's where we are right now.
Okay. Yay, shipperific stuff. So moving on to something, we have a couple of obituaries recently from a couple of somewhat different women, but both pretty important. The death of Ursula K. LeGuin at age 88 was very recent. LeGuin, if you don't know this name, you really should. She was one of the big science fiction writers. One thing that was we've got a few articles about her death and her legacy, including one from Slate. And the Slate article says something really interesting. Let me just find it. There it is. She was interviewed by the New York Times a few years ago, and she told a story that in 1971 she was asked to write the blurb for an anthology of, quote, the most innovative, thought-provoking speculative fiction ever, end quote, by an editor who somehow failed to notice that he had not included a single female. In a celebrated letter, LeGuin declined, and she said she dismissed the anthology not just for this omission, but for its tone, saying, quote, which is so self-contentedly, exclusively male, like a club or a locker room. Gentlemen, I just don't belong here, end quote.
Oh.
Yeah.
You go, girl.
Yeah, get some salve for that burn, folks. So this is somebody who was, we've seen female science fiction writers at times kind of dismissed, and she was earlier in her career. Fortunately, much later, people realized just what an incredible genius and gift she was. The other obituary we have is Dolores O'Riordan, who was way earlier than 88. She was the lead singer of the Cranberries, and beautiful voice, and unfortunately is stilled.
Yeah, that one was, because the Cranberries were very, very popular in the 90s. In the mid-90s, my career as a hairdresser, and back then, number one, I was a lot smaller than I am now, but I had my hair in this very short blonde pixie cut kind of thing, and so one of my classmates in beautiful Bobby, every time I walked past, he would start singing Cranberry song Zombie. So, it was just kind of, it was an in joke, but, I also really enjoyed the Cranberries music, and, I really liked Dolores O'Riordan. And so just because, even just that silly little story, this one just kind of really hit home when I read it.
I mean, she was 46 years old. She, I don't think we have been told the cause of her death, but she was battling mental illness. We do know that. Yeah.
So, I hope that she's found some peace, but, this one was just a really rough one to read.
Yeah, and I'm getting to an age where I'm seeing too many people dying who are younger than me, and that's kind of scary. So the two other pieces of news that we've got are both female-centric, but in very different areas. I want to start with the fluffy one first, because it's just so cool and bizarre. And we just saw this today. So country legend Reba McEntire is apparently she's got a new side gig going on. She's going to be playing Colonel Sanders in commercials starting the week of January 28th, including with a beard, I might add.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've gender bent a character, right? I mean, that's essentially what's going on. And the truth is, Sanders was a real person, but now of course he's deceased, and so the company uses him as sort of a mascot character, so anybody can play him. But the fact that he's being played by a woman for the first time is pretty neat, and evidently her outfit's going to be a little more sparkly, give it more of like a country music kind of flair to it.
It's kind of cool, and it's like, on the one hand, they're gender bending this character, but they're kind of doing it with this intention of like, how do I want to say this? Like, Reba McEntire is kind of like this wholesome representation of, down home America and down home American cooking, I guess, that KFC is supposed to represent. So they went to a woman for that. Like, that's just kind of really cool.
Yeah, and so I'm not a fan of commercials, but I am kind of looking forward to checking out, how they play this, whether it's sort of wink, wink, yeah, I'm wearing a beard, but it's a fake kind of thing, or if they play it straight, that I'm really the Colonel, even though she's got, a higher voice and, it looks rather different. So that'll be interesting. But again, we're seeing another character being gender swapped, and another piece of white male cis culture being changed.
Yeah,
you hear that,
yeah.
MRAs?
Yeah. You try to edit that down and see what you get.
Maybe a drumstick, Maybe
a tiny little chicken wing bone or something like that. I don't know.
So now the other piece of news that we've got, which is also female-centric, but is also disturbing, I think, is another legend. Catherine Deneuve, well-known French actress, she denounced the Me Too movement in a way that was pretty tone-deaf through an article in the New York Times on January 9th. It wasn't just her; it was other people, and basically what they were saying was that they were discounting a lot of the Me Too movement. What they were trying to do, and I think they did it in a very ham-fisted sort of way, is they were attempting to make a distinction between out-and-out rape versus somebody who was, maybe making bad comments or pinched a bottom or something like that. I understand their motivation. I still disagree with it, but I understand their motivation.
I understand it too, but part of the problem is that, like, even if it's a clumsy attempt to ask for a date, or if it's, I don't know, just patting somebody on the bottom or whatever, things that we consider lesser on the spectrum of transgressions a man can commit against a woman, still are entitled to talk about it, and we still need to talk about it because that's how these social boundaries are drawn.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that everybody who's said Me Too, everybody who's used the hashtag or even read it or thought about it is well aware of the difference between somebody getting raped, such as Rose McGowan with Harvey Weinstein, versus somebody who was, where there's sexual remarks are made, or, former President George Bush, the elder, where he's, putting his hand on somebody's butt while he's taking a picture with them. There is absolutely a qualitative difference between them. Nobody's saying that these are the same, because they're not.
Well, and the thing that I really take exception to is that part of what the letter Catherine Deneuve signed says is that this somehow compromises free speech.
Yeah,
and it doesn't.
Well, yeah, and also that the sort of the mating dance between men and women kind of is getting compromised. First off, most of these things happened at work. Or at least, the list that we've got, the sexual harassment list that we've got, the vast majority of those people, it was a work situation where this happened. So these are not dates. This is not asking out. And yeah, you know something? You know why HR has the rules that they do? One of the biggest rules that human resources has is that people aren't supposed to be dating each other if they're not at the same level. And the truth is, HR kind of doesn't want anybody to be dating because they know that most relationships don't work out. Sorry, sorry, romance lovers, but it's true. Most relationships don't work out. So that if you're dating somebody, even if they're exactly the same as you, and they're not in a position of power, so you're not going to lose your job, and it's completely consensual, and it's loving and wonderful, but it doesn't work out, one of you is probably going to leave, and that costs them money.
Or even if you don't leave, like just all of the awkwardness and like the pot shots and the things, that just get the unnecessary drama that gets drawn into it. I mean, it's my alma mater, and I won't say what department, but one of the departments that I was taking classes in, and keep in mind I had 2 majors and a minor, so it could have been anywhere.
It was the gym class, right?
Right, yeah. There was kind of my class, my instructor was still experiencing some kind of bumpy kind of stuff, I'll say, because was married to another instructor, and it didn't end well. Mm-hmm. And so that was causing a ripple effect throughout the department. And it kind of really didn't touch us too much at the student level, but I think maybe it did, from what I understand, the cohorts ahead of me. Mm. And I'm sure that it made for some interesting faculty meetings.
No doubt. And I have a little story to tell you once you're done, but yeah.
But on the other hand, though, like where I go to school right now, there are 3 married couples, and, within the faculty that I am aware of, maybe 4, and it seems to be working out quite well. So, different rules, different places. This is the kind of thing that happens a lot in academia, especially, if you're doing the job search and both of you are academics, one of you lands a job. And so sometimes one of the caveats is, can you find a position for my spouse as well? That happens a lot.
That's completely understandable, particularly if you're moving to the other side of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in high school, the French teacher was one of the French teachers was married to one of the math teachers, and he like the year after I graduated, he had an affair with the school nurse in the junior high, and he and his wife divorced, and they were all still working within the school system at least a few years after I graduated. That must have been fun and real awkward at those faculty meetings.
Yeah, and kind of the point is, and you mentioned HR, so kind of what I was thinking there is that, with the couples with which that it seems to be succeeding that I can observe right now, even if it wasn't succeeding, we wouldn't know about it because they do keep it professional at work. They don't act like married people at work. So when I go to one professor's class and then I go to like maybe their spouse's class or whatever, like, except for like the most passing reference, you wouldn't even necessarily be aware that they were married. So they do a pretty good job of keeping home life at home and work life out of work. But those HR rules kind of exist in other places because a lot of times you can't be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly, and and also with Deneuve and the others, where they're saying the mating dance and whatnot. I don't know about you, but when I'm at work, I kind of work.
Yeah, for the most part. and we even talked about on the last show that mating dance exists because of weird social constructions we have to basically perpetuate systemic misogyny. Women historically haven't had the agency to say yes, along with the agency to say no. So we have these weird little mating dances that happen, and they're kind of going out of style. They're on their way out in terms of being in favor, but a lot of society hasn't caught up with that idea yet.
Yeah, and one of these days.
Another thing that I'm seeing in a lot of articles too is this idea that people can't tell the difference. A really bad attempt to ask for a date or cross signals and a physical sexual assault. And I think that there is actually no evidence out there that any such thing has actually happened in the of the Me Too.
Yeah, I more often than not, that's people are going to know the difference.
Yeah, so that's just pearl clutching. That's not anything that.
Yeah, I hate to break it to these folks, but when Steven Seagal, for example, says to a potential co-star, "I need for you to strip," during the auditioning process, so I can see if you're good for the role, and it's not a nude scene. That's not the little mating dance. When Louis C.K. is hanging out with his with female comedian buddies, and he takes off his pants, that's not the mating dance either.
Now, when I was working in a salon and I pulled the cape off my client and his pants were unzipped and his junk was hanging out, that wasn't the mating dance.
Exactly. The male paralegal who used to push up against the female lawyers and the secretaries and the paralegals when we were using the photocopier in a very narrow aisle, that wasn't a mating dance either.
And I kind of have a hard time feeling sympathy for these men who claim that, well, we can't do anything anymore. We can't say anything anymore. We can't even ask a woman out. We can't talk to her. You know what? Yes, you can. If you ask me out and I say no, that's not the beginning of a negotiation. The discussion is over, just as if you would have said no. That's all you need to know going in. And if you know that fact, if you memorize it, and if you live by it, it will change your life.
Exactly. It's funny because like for work, I read a bunch of books and also my boss does, and I end up interpreting them with him. And one of them recently was on negotiations, and it was, and no is the opening of the negotiations. Like, yeah, that's perfect for business. It's not for human relationships, though.
Yeah, so and I think that men, well, and I think women too, but just because of internalized and systemic misogyny, there's this idea that everything is transactional.
Yeah, not everything's up for negotiation, and yeah, that's not. On that happy note.
On that note,
because we've done a good 2 hours.
Here's Coldplay.
We were joking about that before, that that you'd have these like these local radio stations, and they would report on some horrible disaster. There are 260 dead, and now here's Coldplay.
So that's not meant like to be derogatory against Coldplay. I actually like quite a couple. I don't know about quite a few songs, but there's a few of their songs that I actually like quite a bit. But it was just kind of like when I made this joke, Coldplay was the first thing that popped into my head, and now it's just there for me anytime I need it.
So now we'll
we'll do a nice article. We'll do a nice segment on Coldplay sometime soon.
I promise you. We apologize to you profusely. So thank you so much for listening. This has been this has been an interesting discussion, and very we got off on some sort of wacky tangents, but I hope it's been entertaining and at least informative, if nothing else.
Yeah, me too. And thank you on behalf of Janet and myself and Coldplay.
All right, so next time, which will be February. I don't know if we're still talking about sexual harassment, we can talk about it in context with Valentine's Day.
Yeah, and I'm sure there may be some more developments with the X-Files to talk about, and we'll have other fandom-y goodness for you as it emerges throughout the month.
Definitely. Star Trek Discovery. I think Star Trek Discovery will be ending its first season episodes within February, won't it?
Yeah, and I think the X-Files will be over by then as well. So, but I think in March, though, I think that's when The Handmaid's Tale. back. So we can
Woohoo.
definitely, if it's not back by the time we start recording, we can definitely get giddy with anticipation about the misogynistic dystopia that we're headed for.
Co-dystopia, awesome. All right, and hopefully by then I will have some beta readers. So until then, thank you so much for listening, and go Patriots.
Okay, I don't do the sports ball.
I know.
So just wish me luck on finishing my proposal and successfully defending it.
Best of luck to you, and because I know you're gonna crush it.
Well, I hope so. If it doesn't crush me first.
I have every faith in you.
Well, thank you. All right, y'all. Peace out, and we'll come at you next month.
Okay, and live short and suffer according to the mirror universe.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Music provided by Invocation Array. Send mail to hosts@semanticshenanigans.com. Follow us on Twitter at 2shenanigans. That's the number, not the word. 2shenanigans. On Facebook, you can find us at Semantic Shenanigans. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Semantic Shenanigans. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Semantic Shenanigans.